The Montana wind cut through Samuel Granger's coat as he stood on that train platform, ready to send the woman back where she came from. He never asked for a mail-order bride. His meddling sister had arranged it all behind his back. But then Eliza Marlowe stepped off that train, her worn traveling dress dusty from the journey, a crooked hat barely holding back her auburn hair, and a single tear sliding down her cheek as she clutched a battered satchel. In that moment, something shifted in his chest, something he'd sworn had died with his wife and son 3 winters ago. If you're watching from anywhere in this wide world, leave a comment about your city below. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The September sun hung low over the Montana Territory, painting the grasslands in shades of gold and amber that stretched endlessly toward the mountains. Samuel Granger had ridden hard for 3 hours to reach the train station in Cedar Creek, fury burning in his chest with every mile. His sister Margaret's letter crumpled in his pocket told him everything he needed to know. She'd gone behind his back, written to some matrimonial agency back east, and arranged for a woman to come out as his bride. Damn fool woman, he muttered under his breath, thinking of Margaret. Got no business meddling in a man's life. The train's whistle pierced the afternoon air, black smoke billowing against the clear sky. Samuel's jaw clenched as he watched it slow to a stop, steam hissing from the engine like an angry serpent. He'd rehearsed what he would say a dozen times on the ride over. He'd be polite but firm. He'd give the woman money for a return ticket, maybe a night's stay at the boarding house if needed. Then he'd send her right back to wherever she came from. He didn't need a wife, didn't want one. The graves on the hill behind his ranch house were testament enough to what happened when a man let himself care too much. The conductor helped passengers disembark, a handful of merchants, a family with 3 children, an elderly couple. Samuel scanned the platform, looking for a woman traveling alone. Then he saw her. She stood beside a single trunk, smaller than he'd expected, wearing a navy traveling dress that had seen better days. The hem was dusty, one button hung loose, and the collar showed signs of careful mending. Her auburn hair was pinned up beneath a hat that sat slightly askew, as if she'd tried to fix it without a mirror. But it was her face that stopped him cold. She wasn't crying, not exactly, just that single tear catching the afternoon light as it traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly with a gloved hand that trembled slightly, then straightened her shoulders and looked around the platform with a mixture of hope and fear that made something twist in Samuel's gut. "Miss Marlowe?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She turned, and her eyes, green as spring grass after rain, met his. For a moment, neither spoke. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw despite the uncertainty in her gaze. "Mr. Granger?" Her voice was softer than he'd expected, with a slight tremor that she was clearly trying to control. "I'm Eliza Marlowe. Your sister Margaret, she wrote to me about—" "I know what she wrote." Samuel cut her off, then immediately regretted his harsh tone when she flinched slightly. He pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his dark hair. "Look, Miss Marlowe, there's been a misunderstanding. My sister had no right to arrange this. I didn't ask for a bride, and I'm not looking for one." The color drained from her face, but she didn't look away. "I see," she said quietly. "Margaret's letters said you knew. Said you were eager for—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "I suppose that was foolish of me to believe." Samuel noticed how her fingers tightened on the handle of her satchel, knuckles white with the thin fabric of her glove. She glanced back at the train, which was already preparing to depart, steam building for the next leg of its journey. "When does the next eastbound train come through?" she asked, her voice steady despite everything. 3 days, Samuel replied. "But I'll pay for your ticket, and there's a boarding house in town where you can stay." 3 days, she repeated, almost to herself. Then she laughed, but it was a broken sound that had no humor in it. "I spent everything I had to get here, Mr. Granger. Sold my mother's pearl necklace, the last thing I had of hers. I have exactly 17 cents to my name." The train whistle blew again, and the locomotive began to move, slowly picking up speed as it headed west. They both watched it go, and Samuel saw her shoulders slump slightly as her last immediate means of escape disappeared into the distance. "Why?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "Why would you come all this way on the word of a stranger?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the train become a speck on the horizon. When she finally looked back at him, there was something fierce in her eyes, despite the wetness still clinging to her lashes. Because sometimes, Mr. Granger, when you've lost everything, a letter promising a new life in Montana seems like hope itself, even if it turns out to be a lie. She picked up her trunk, though he could see the effort it cost her. If you could just point me toward that boarding house, I'll figure out the rest myself. The trunk slipped from her grasp, hitting the platform with a thud. She bent to retrieve it, and Samuel saw her pause just for a second, her hand pressed to her side as if in pain. When she straightened, her face was pale but determined. "You're hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. "It's nothing, just tired from the journey." But even as she said it, she swayed slightly. Samuel cursed under his breath. He couldn't leave her here. Not like this. His ranch was an hour's ride from town, but he had the wagon. He'd brought it thinking he'd need it for her trunks. Margaret's letter had suggested a woman coming west would have plenty of belongings. Instead, there was just this one small trunk and a woman who looked like a strong wind might knock her over. "How long since you ate?" he asked. She hesitated. "There was some bread yesterday morning, before we crossed into Montana." "Yesterday morning?" Samuel felt his anger at Margaret surge anew, but this time it was mixed with something else. Responsibility, maybe, or just basic human decency. "Come on. I told you, Mr. Granger, I can manage." "No, you can't." He picked up her trunk easily with one hand, noticed how light it was. "You can't stay at the boarding house with 17 cents, and you sure as hell can't wait 3 days without food. I'm not so far gone that I'd leave a woman to starve on a train platform." She studied his face, and he wondered what she saw there. A bitter rancher who'd shut himself off from the world? A man still carrying ghosts? Whatever it was, she must have decided to trust it, because she nodded slowly. "Just until the next train," she said. "I won't impose longer than that." Samuel led her to where he'd left the wagon and helped her up onto the seat. She moved carefully, and he noticed again that slight pressure of her hand to her rib. As he loaded her trunk in the back, he caught sight of his reflection in the window of the general store, unshaven, hollow-eyed, looking every one of his 34 years and then some. What was he doing? He'd come here to send her away, and now he was taking her home. But the memory of that single tear, the quiet dignity in her voice when she talked about selling her mother's necklace, it stirred something in him he thought was long dead. As they rode out of town, Eliza spoke. "Your sister's letters painted quite a picture of you." "Did they now?" Samuel kept his eyes on the road ahead. "She said you were kind, that you just needed someone to remind you of it." Samuel snorted. "Margaret always did see what she wanted to see. She also said you'd lost your family, your wife and son." His hands tightened on the reins. "She had no business telling you that." "Perhaps not," Eliza agreed, "but I understood it. Loss, I mean. It's like a language only some people speak, isn't it? You can recognize it in others, even when they're trying to hide it." Samuel glanced at her. She was looking out at the landscape, the endless grass rippling like a golden sea. The afternoon sun caught the red in her hair, making it glow like burnished copper. "What did you lose?" he found himself asking. "Everything," she said simply. "My parents died when I was 17, Scarlet. I worked as a seamstress in Boston, lived in a boarding house. Then the shop closed and the boarding house was sold to developers. When I saw the advertisement for mail-order brides, it seemed like..." She trailed off. "Like hope," Samuel finished. "Yes." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "But hope can be cruel, can it? Making you believe things might be different and showing you they're just the same." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the creak of wagon wheels and the distant cry of hawk. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. "That's my land," Samuel said eventually, gesturing to the fence line they were following. "Ranch goes from here to those foothills. Run about 300 head of cattle, some horses." "It's beautiful," Eliza said, and he could hear the genuine appreciation in her voice. "I've never seen so much space. In Boston, you could barely see the sky between the buildings." "Gets lonely," Samuel said before he could stop himself. "Yes," she agreed. "I imagine it does." As they crested a hill, the ranch house came into view. It was a solid structure, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch across the front. Behind it stood a barn, a couple of outbuildings, and on a small rise to the west, a lone cottonwood tree with 2 crosses beneath it. Eliza followed his gaze to the graves, but said nothing. "Built this place myself," Samuel said, needing to fill the silence. "Me and Catherine, my wife. Took us 2 years to get it finished." "You built her a fine home," Eliza said softly. Samuel pulled the wagon up to the front of the house. As he helped Eliza down, she winced again, and this time he saw a dark stain on the side of her dress. "You are hurt," he said. "It's nothing, really. Just a mishap on the train. Someone's trunk fell from the overhead rack. The corner caught me in the ribs. Let me see. Mr. Granger, that's hardly... I've doctored enough injured ranch hands to know when someone needs tending. And call me Samuel. If you're going to be here for 3 days, we might as well drop the formality." She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the house was dim and cool. Samuel lit a lamp while Eliza looked around. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table at the other. Everything was clean but spare, functional rather than comfortable. "Sit," Samuel said, gesturing to a chair. He fetched his medical supplies, items he kept on hand for ranch accidents. "You'll need to... that is, the dress. I understand." Eliza's cheeks colored slightly, but she unbuttoned the side of her bodice enough to reveal the injury. The bruise was purple-black, spreading across her ribs like spilled ink. Samuel winced. "That must hurt like hell, pardon my language." "I've heard worse," she said with a slight smile. "My father was a dock worker before he married my mother. He tried to watch his tongue around her, but when he hit his thumb with a hammer..." Samuel found himself almost smiling as he carefully applied a salve to the bruised area. His hands were gentle despite their size, calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly careful. "You've done this before," Eliza observed. "Catherine was always patching someone up. Me, the ranch hands. Then when James came along, our son, it seemed like he was always getting into scrapes." His hands stilled. "I learned from watching her." "How old was he, James?" Samuel wrapped a bandage around her ribs to support them. 6. Would have been 9 this year. "I'm sorry." "Fever took them both, winter of 72, 3 years ago." He stepped back, busying himself with putting away the medical supplies. "There. That should help. You'll want to keep it wrapped for a few days." Eliza carefully fixed her dress. "Thank you." Samuel started preparing a meal. Nothing fancy, just beans and salt pork, some cornbread he'd made that morning. As he worked, he was aware of Eliza watching him, taking in the careful way he moved around the kitchen, the practiced efficiency of a man who'd been alone long enough to develop his own rhythm. "Margaret said you haven't been to town in months," Eliza said, "that the ranch hands have to practically force you to go for supplies." "Margaret says too much," Samuel replied, setting a plate in front of her. "Eat." She didn't need to be told twice. Despite her obvious attempt at maintaining proper manners, Samuel could see how hungry she was. He found himself filling her plate again without being asked. "When did you leave Boston?" he asked. 2 weeks ago. The train was delayed twice, once in Chicago, once in Wyoming. A bridge was out." She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "I wrote to Margaret from Chicago, telling her when I'd arrive. She wrote back saying you were eager to meet me." "Of course she did." Samuel shook his head. "My sister means well, but she's got this idea that if she just pushes hard enough, she can fix everything. Can't accept that some things are meant to stay broken." "Are they?" Eliza asked. "Meant to stay broken?" He looked at her across the table. In the lamplight, her face was soft, shadows playing across her features. There was something in her eyes, not pity, which he would have hated, but understanding. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I didn't ask for this. Didn't ask for you to come here." "No," she agreed. "You didn't. And I'll leave on that train in 3 days, just as you want. But Samuel..." She paused, seemed to gather her courage. "What will you do then? Go back to being alone? Let Margaret try again in another year or 2? "That's my business." "Yes, it is." She stood, began clearing the plates despite his protest. "But loneliness is a choice, you know, just like hope." As she worked, Samuel noticed the efficient way she moved. how she seemed to instinctively know where things belonged, despite this being her first time in his kitchen. When she'd washed the dishes, again, despite his protest, she turned to him. "Where should I sleep? I can make a pallet by the fire." "Upstairs," Samuel said. "First door on the right. It was the guest room." He didn't add that no one had slept in it since Catherine's sister had visited the month before she died. Eliza nodded. "Thank you for everything. I know this isn't what you wanted." After she'd gone upstairs, Samuel sat by the fire, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He could hear her moving around above, the creak of floorboards he'd laid with his own hands. It was strange having another person in the house. For 3 years, it had been just him and the ghost. He thought about what she'd said, that loneliness was a choice. Maybe it was, but it was a safer choice than the alternative. He'd loved Catherine with everything he had, and losing her had nearly killed him. Losing James had finished the job, leaving him a hollow man going through the motions of living. But that woman upstairs, with her single tear and her 17 cents and her quiet dignity, she'd stirred something. Not love, God no. He wasn't capable of that anymore. But maybe something like recognition. She'd said loss was like a language only some people spoke. Maybe that was it. Maybe he recognized a fellow speaker. The fire was dying to embers when he heard her footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in a white nightgown that had seen better days, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The quiet here is different from city quiet." "Takes some getting used to," Samuel agreed. She sat in the chair across from him, tucking her feet under her. "Tell me about her." "Catherine." Samuel stiffened. "Why?" "Because she was part of this house. I can feel her here, in the way the kitchen is arranged, in the curtains on the windows. If I'm going to stay here, even for just 3 days, I'd like to know about the woman who made this a home." Samuel was quiet for so long that Eliza probably thought he wouldn't answer. Then, surprising himself, he began to speak. "She was nothing like what I expected. Came out here with her father, who was surveying for the railroad. I was just starting the ranch, living in a one-room cabin that leaked when it rained. She rode up one day asking for water for her horse, and I was so tongue-tied I could barely speak. She laughed. Not mean, just delighted, I guess. Said she'd never seen a man turn so red." Eliza smiled. "How long before you were married?" 6 months. Her father tried to talk her out of it, said I had nothing to offer but hard work and empty land. But Catherine, she saw something else, saw what this place could be. We built it together, every board, every stone. When James came along, she said the house finally had a heart. She sounds wonderful." She was. Samuel stared into the dying fire. Maybe that was the problem. Everything was too perfect. Should have known it couldn't last. "My mother used to say that happiness isn't about how long something lasts," Eliza said. "It's about how deeply you feel it while you have it." "Your mother sounds wise." She was. She and my father, they only had 20 years together. But she used to say those 20 years were worth a lifetime of ordinary love. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling softly. Finally, Eliza stood. "I should try to sleep again. Dawn comes early on a ranch, I imagine." "It does," Samuel confirmed. As she headed for the stairs, she paused. "Samuel, thank you for not sending me back today. I know you wanted to." "Still might," he said, but there was no real conviction in it. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows. "Good night, Samuel." After she'd gone, Samuel remained by the fire. 3 days. He just had to get through 3 days, then she'd be gone and life would go back to the way it was. Safe, predictable, lonely. But as he finally headed to his own room, he found himself thinking about that smile, about the way she'd said his name. And for the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning came with a frost, unusual for September. Samuel was up before dawn, as always, stoking the fire and starting coffee. He was reaching for the bacon when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Eliza appeared, fully dressed, her hair pinned up neatly. "Good morning." "Morning. You're up early." "I'm used to it. The seamstress shop opened at 7, and I had to walk 20 minutes to get there." She moved to the stove. Let me help with breakfast. I can manage. I'm sure you can, but I'm here, and I don't like being idle. She gently but firmly took the bacon from him. Besides, cooking for someone else might be nice for a change. Samuel watched as she moved around the kitchen, cracking eggs, slicing bread. She worked with the same quiet efficiency he'd noticed the night before, and soon the smell of a proper breakfast filled the house. "You're going to spoil me," he said without thinking, then immediately regretted it. But Eliza just smiled. Somehow, I doubt 3 days of decent meals will undo 3 years of habit. As they ate, Samuel found himself telling her about the ranch's daily operations, the challenges of raising cattle in Montana territory, the harsh winters and unpredictable springs. Eliza listened attentively, asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested. "I need to check on the herd today," he said. "North pasture. You'll be all right here alone?" "Of course, though," she hesitated. "Would it be all right if I did some cleaning? I noticed the windows could use washing, and there's mending in that basket by, You don't need to earn your keep," Samuel interrupted. "You're a guest, not a servant." "I know that, but I told you I don't like being idle, and..." She looked around the room. "This is a good house. It deserves care." Something in the way she said it, respectful of what the house had been rather than critical of what it had become, made Samuel nod. "Do what you like," he said. When he returned that evening, the change was noticeable. The windows sparkled, letting in more light than they had in months. The floors had been scrubbed, the furniture dusted, but more than that, there were small touches. A jar of wildflowers on the table, the chairs arranged to catch the afternoon sun, a quilt aired and folded over the back of the sofa. Eliza was at the stove, something that smelled incredible simmering in a pot. "I found some vegetables in the root cellar," she said, "and herbs growing wild behind the house. I hope you don't mind." "It smells good," Samuel admitted. "Haven't had proper stew in a long time." Over dinner, Eliza told him about Boston, about the crowded streets and busy shop, the harbor with its forest of masts, the public gardens where she'd walk on Sundays. "Don't you miss it?" Samuel asked. "Parts of it," she admitted. "But mostly I miss having a purpose, feeling useful. In the boarding house, after I lost my position, I was just existing, waiting for something to change. And now?" She looked at him across the table. "Now I'm in Montana, eating stew with a man who doesn't want me here, waiting for a train to take me back to nothing." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I don't..." Samuel started, then stopped. "It's not about you. You seem like a good woman. It's just, you're not ready. I understand." She stood, began clearing the dishes. "Though I wonder if anyone's ever really ready for life to change. Maybe we just have to let it happen sometime." That night, they sat by the fire again. Eliza had found some yarn in a basket and was knitting, her fingers moving in steady rhythm. Samuel pretended to read, but found himself watching her instead. The firelight caught in her hair, turned her skin to gold. "What are you making?" he asked. "A scarf. Winter's coming, and I noticed you don't have one." "I won't need it. I mean, you'll be taking it with you." She looked up at him. "Will I?" Their eyes met and held for a moment. Then Eliza looked back at her knitting. "Of course. On the train, day after tomorrow." But something had shifted between them, some unspoken acknowledgement that things weren't quite as simple as they'd seemed. The second day dawned cloudy, with the smell of rain in the air. Samuel found Eliza already up, making breakfast. "Storm coming," he said. "I can feel it. My ribs always ache before rain." She set a plate in front of him. "Will the cattle be all right?" "They know how to find shelter, but I should check the fences, make sure nothing's loose before it hits." "Can I come with you?" Samuel looked at her in surprise. "It's rough riding, and with your ribs, they're much better, truly, and I'd like to see more of the ranch before..." She trailed off. "Before I leave." Against his better judgment, Samuel agreed. He saddled 2 horses, choosing Catherine's gentle mare for Eliza. She mounted carefully, but competently. "You've ridden before," he observed. "A little. My father sometimes took me to the stables where he worked. The owners let me exercise the gentler horses." They rode out across the pasture, Samuel pointing out landmarks, the creek that marked the eastern boundary, The box canyon where they sheltered the herd during blizzards, the high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in spring. "It's magnificent," Eliza breathed, looking out over the vast expanse of grassland. "I've never seen anything like it." "Catherine loved it up here," Samuel said, then wondered why he'd shared that. They were checking the fence along the north pasture when the rain started, just a drizzle at first, then harder. Samuel pointed to a lined shack about a quarter-mile away. "We'll wait it out there," he shouted over the increasing wind. They made it just as the sky opened up, rain coming down in sheets. The shack was basic, just one room with a stove, a narrow bed, and a few supplies. Samuel got a fire going while Eliza wrung water from her skirts. "Some ranch wife I'd make," she said with a self-deprecating laugh. "First time out, and I'm already half drowned." "You did fine," Samuel said. "Better than fine. Most city women would have been complaining the whole way." "I'm not most city women." "No," he agreed. "You're not." They were close in the small space, close enough that he could see the drops of rain clinging to her eyelashes, smell the lavender soap she must have brought from Boston. When she shivered, he automatically put his jacket around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment Samuel forgot about the train coming tomorrow, forgot about his vows to stay alone, forgot everything but the woman in front of him. He leaned forward slightly, and she didn't pull away. Then thunder crashed overhead, breaking the spell. Samuel stepped back, ran a hand through his wet hair. "Rain's letting up," he said roughly. "We should head back." The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. That evening, Eliza made dinner while Samuel tended to the horses. When he came in, she had her trunk open, carefully folding her few possessions. "Getting ready," she said unnecessarily. "Right. I'll take you to town first thing in the morning." "Of course." But at dinner, neither of them ate much. The conversation was stilted, both of them avoiding what had almost happened in the line shack. Finally, Eliza stood. "I should get some rest. Early morning." "Eliza," Samuel called as she headed for the stairs. She turned. "I want you to know, these 3 days, it's been good having you here." "It's been good being here," she replied. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He stood at his window, looking out at the cottonwood tree on the hill. He'd made a promise there, kneeling between those two graves. Promised he'd never forget, never replace them, never risk that kind of pain again. But Eliza wasn't trying to replace anyone. She was just Eliza, with her quiet strength and her gentle hands and her understanding of loss. Maybe that was what scared him most, not that she was trying to take Catherine's place, but that she was making her own place, one he hadn't known was empty until she filled it. When morning came, gray and misty, Samuel loaded Eliza's trunk onto the wagon. She came out in her traveling dress, the same one she'd worn when she arrived, but clean and carefully mended. The loose button had been sewn back on, the hem brushed clean. They didn't talk much on the ride to town. The mountains were shrouded in fog, giving everything a dreamlike quality. Eliza kept her hands folded in her lap, but Samuel noticed they were trembling slightly. At the station, the eastbound train was already there, taking on water and supplies. Samuel helped Eliza down from the wagon, set her trunk on the platform. "Here," he said, pulling out money, "for the ticket and some extra for food and—" "No," Eliza said firmly. "I won't take your money, Samuel. I came here of my own free will, and I'll leave the same way." "But you said you only have 17 cents. "I'll manage. I always have." She looked up at him, and he saw that same mix of hope and fear he'd seen 3 days ago. "Thank you for these days, for showing me your ranch, your life, for not sending me away that first day." "Eliza." He didn't know what to say, what he wanted to say. The conductor called for passengers to board. Eliza picked up her trunk, took a step toward the train, then stopped. She turned back to him. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" "If Margaret hadn't written those letters, if I hadn't come, would you have gone on as you were? Just you and the ranch and the ghosts?" "Probably," he admitted. "That's what I thought." She smiled sadly. "Goodbye, Samuel. I hope someday you find what you're looking for. What if I've already found it?" The words came out before he could stop them. She froze, then slowly turned back to him. "What are you saying?" Samuel looked at her, really looked at her. The proud tilt of her chin despite her circumstances, the way the morning light caught in her hair, the strength in those green eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow. "I'm saying that 3 days ago, I was ready to send you back without a second thought. And now," he took off his hat, crushed it in his hands. "Now, I'm standing here trying to figure out how I'm going to go back to that empty house without you in it. Samuel, I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast. I know I said I didn't want a wife. But Eliza, these 3 days, the house felt alive again. I felt alive again." The train whistle blew, last call for passengers. "If you get on that train," Samuel said urgently, "I'll understand. You deserve better than a broken-down rancher who's been living with ghosts. But if you stay, I can't promise it'll be easy. I can't promise I won't have bad days where I shut myself off. But I can promise I'll try. I'll try to be the man Margaret told you about in those letters." Eliza set down her trunk. "I don't want the man from Margaret's letters," she said. "I want the man who doctored my ribs with gentle hands. The man who showed me his ranch with pride. The man who sat with me by the fire and told me about the woman he loved. Even knowing I might never love you the way I loved her." Eliza stepped closer to him. "Samuel, I'm not asking you to love me the way you loved Catherine. That was her love, her place. I'm asking you to maybe, someday, love me as Eliza, in whatever way you can." The train began to move, slowly pulling away from the station. They both watched it go, taking with it Eliza's chance to leave. "Now you're stuck," Samuel said. "Now I'm home," she corrected. Samuel looked at her. This woman who'd arrived with 17 cents and a single tear, who'd cleaned his windows and mended his shirts, and made his house smell like stew and fresh bread. Who'd ridden through rain and sat by his fire and understood his ghosts without trying to banish them. "Come on," he said, picking up her trunk. "Let's go home." As they rode back to the ranch, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the grasslands gold. Eliza slipped her hand into Samuel's free one, and he squeezed it gently. "Margaret's going to be insufferable when she finds out," he said. "Should we write to her?" "Eventually, let her stew for a while, wondering what happened." Eliza laughed, and the sound was like music across the prairie. "That's a little cruel. She deceived both of us. A little wondering won't hurt her." He glanced at her. "Besides, I'm not quite ready to share you with the world yet, even Margaret." "How long before you're ready?" Samuel thought about it. "Maybe by Christmas, or spring, or maybe never." "Never is a long time," Eliza said. "Yes," Samuel agreed, helping her down from the wagon in front of the house. "It is." That evening, as Eliza prepared dinner and Samuel tended the fire, the house felt different. Not like it had with Catherine. That was a different time, a different love, but full in a new way, with new possibilities. "I've been thinking," Eliza said as they ate, "that garden plot behind the house. Would you mind if I planted vegetables? Maybe some flowers?" "Plant whatever you want," Samuel said, "though flowers seem impractical." "Sometimes the most important things are impractical," Eliza replied. "Beauty for beauty's sake, joy just because." "Catherine would have liked you," Samuel said suddenly. Eliza smiled. "I would have liked her too." That night, they sat by the fire again, but this time Eliza sat closer, and when she got tired, she let her head rest against Samuel's shoulder. He tensed at first, then slowly relaxed, even putting his arm around her. "Tell me about Boston," he said. "About your parents, your life there." So she did, painting pictures with words of cobblestone streets and ships' masts, of her mother's laugh and her father's strong hands, of the small apartment where they'd been a family until fever took it all away. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Samuel asked. "To before the loss?" "Sometimes," Eliza admitted. "But then I think, if none of that had happened, I wouldn't be here. And despite everything, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Samuel was quiet for a long time. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear it, he said, "So do I." Joey peeled from the south.
Louis Chaloi Chomuk Tinyan Komye sang document edit the weeks that followed Eliza's decision to stay unfolded like the slow turning of season.
Each morning brought new rhythms to the ranch, small changes that gradually transformed the house from a place of mere survival to something resembling a home again. Samuel would wake to find coffee already brewing, the smell pulling him from bed earlier than his usual habit. Eliza moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, as if she'd always belonged there, though she was careful never to disturb the things that had been Catherine's, the china teacups on the high shelf, the embroidered tablecloth folded in the drawer. "You don't have to tiptoe around her memory," Samuel said one morning, catching Eliza carefully working around Catherine's apron that still hung on its hook by the stove.
"I'm not tiptoeing," Eliza replied, her hands steady as she kneaded bread dough. "I'm being respectful. There's a difference." Samuel watched her work, the morning sun streaming through the clean windows, catching the flour dust in the air like tiny stars. "You can use it. The apron." She would have wanted it used. Eliza's hand stilled for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yeah." Samuel's voice was rough. "Yeah, I'm sure." When Eliza reached for the apron, her movements were reverent. She tied it around her waist, and something in Samuel's chest loosened, a knot he hadn't known was there. It wasn't betrayal he felt, watching another woman wear Catherine's apron. It was more like continuity, like the ranch itself continuing season after season. The first test of their fragile new arrangement came sooner than expected. Jake Morrison, Samuel's foreman, arrived one afternoon with news that rustlers had been spotted near the southern boundary. "Could lose 50 head if we don't act fast," Jake said, his weathered face grim. He glanced at Eliza, who was mending one of Samuel's shirts by the window, then back at Samuel with raised eyebrows. "This is Miss Marlowe," Samuel said simply. "She's staying on." Jake's eyebrows climbed higher, but he just touched his hat.
"Ma'am." "Mr. Morrison," Eliza nodded. "Samuel's told me about you. Says you're the best foreman in Montana Territory." Jake actually blushed. "Well, I don't know about that." "Jake, get the boys ready," Samuel said. "We'll ride out at first light. Catch them before they can move the herd." "You'll need food," Eliza said, setting aside her napkin. "How many men?" "6, maybe 7, Jake replied, looking at her with new interest. "I'll have provisions ready by dawn." She turned to Samuel. "You'll be careful?" The concern in her voice was unmistakable, and Jake's eyes widened slightly. Samuel felt heat rise in his neck. "Always am." After Jake left, Samuel found Eliza in the kitchen, already making lists of supplies. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Of course I do." She didn't look up from her list. "Those men need to eat, and they need to eat well if they're going after rustlers. I won't have anyone saying that this ranch doesn't take care of its own." This ranch. Not your ranch, but this ranch, as if she already considered herself part of it. That night, Eliza worked late preparing food, biscuits, dried meat, canned peaches from the cellar. Samuel tried to help, but she shooed him away. "You need rest. You can't catch rustlers if you're falling asleep in the saddle." But Samuel couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, watching light from the kitchen window spill onto the yard below. He could hear Eliza moving around, the occasional clatter of pans, and once, the soft sound of her singing. He didn't recognize the melody, but it was sweet and sad, and it made him think of all the nights Catherine had spent in that same kitchen, preparing for the same kinds of emergencies. When he came down before dawn, Eliza was there with coffee and a hot breakfast, packages of food ready for the men. She'd been up all night, he realized, seeing the shadows under her eyes. "You should have slept," he said. "I can sleep when you're back safe." She handed him a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Extra food just for you. And Samuel?" She hesitated, then reached up to adjust his collar, her fingers lingering for just a moment. "Come back safe." "Planning on it," he said, caught by the green of her eyes in the lamplight. The other men arrived, Jake and 5 others, all rough cowboys who'd been with the ranch for years. They looked at Eliza with curiosity, but she met their gazes steadily, handing out food packages and filling their canteens with hot coffee. "Thank you kindly, miss," Tom Bradley, the youngest of them, said with a shy smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Bradley. Samuel says you're the best shot on the ranch." Tom's chest puffed with pride. "Well, I practice when I can." As the men mounted up, Samuel looked back to see Eliza standing in the doorway,
one hand on the frame, watching them go. The rising sun painted her silhouette golden, and for a moment Samuel felt a pull so strong it almost unseated him.
Not desire, exactly, though that was there too. More like gravity, like she was becoming his center whether he wanted it or not.
They found the rustlers camped in a box canyon, just as Jake had predicted. The confrontation was brief but intense. Shots fired, men shouting, cattle scattering. Samuel took a bullet graze across his upper arm. Nothing serious, but enough to bleed through his shirt. They recovered most of the stolen cattle and sent the rustlers running, though not before Jake recognized one of them. "That was Bill Hartley's boy," Jake said as they drove the cattle back. "From the Double H ranch." Samuel cursed under his breath. Bill Hartley was a big rancher with political connections. This would mean trouble. When they arrived back at the ranch near sunset, Eliza was waiting on the porch. She took one look at Samuel's bloody sleeve and went pale. "Inside," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "Now." "It's just a scratch. I'll be the judge of that. Mr.
Morrison, thank you for bringing him back. There's food in the kitchen for all of you."
Jake tipped his hat, a small smile playing at his lips.
"Yes, ma'am."
Inside, Eliza's hands were gentle but efficient as she cleaned and bandaged Samuel's arm. "You said you'd be careful," she said quietly. "This is careful. You should see the other time." She looked up at him sharply. "It's not funny." Eliza... No. She stood abruptly, turning away from him. "You don't understand. I've already lost everyone who mattered to me. I can't... I won't." Samuel caught her hand, pulled her back. "Hey, I'm fine. I'm right here." She looked at him, and he saw tears threaten. "You barely know me. We've only been, whatever this is, for a few weeks. You shouldn't matter this much already." "But I do?" She nodded, looking frustrated with herself. "Yes, God help me. Yes." Samuel pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees as he sat on the kitchen chair. "Is that such a bad thing?" "It terrifies me," she admitted. "I came here with nothing to lose. Now you have something to lose again." Samuel understood that fear intimately. "It's terrifying for me, too." They stayed like that for a moment, her hands on his shoulders, his hands on her waist, neither quite brave enough to close the remaining distance between them. It was Jake's voice from outside that broke the moment. "Boss, we got a problem." Bill Hartley arrived the next morning with the sheriff and 3 of his men. Samuel met them in the yard, his arms still bandaged, Eliza watching from the porch. "Your men attacked my boy," Hartley said without preamble. He was a big man, running to fat but still powerful, with cold eyes and a politician's smile. "Your boy was rustling my cattle," Samuel replied evenly. "That's a serious accusation, Granger. You got proof?" "Got my cattle back. That's proof enough." The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Collins, shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Sam, Bill here says his boy was just rounding up strays. Honest mistake." 50 head is a lot of strays, Sheriff. Hartley's eyes narrowed. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm calling things as I see them. Maybe you're not seeing straight these days." Hartley's gaze shifted to Eliza on the porch. "Heard you got yourself a woman. Mail-order bride, isn't that right? Must be affecting your judgment." Samuel's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, Eliza stepped forward. "Mr. Hartley, is it?" Her voice was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I'm Eliza Marlowe, and while I did indeed come from back east, I assure you my presence here has only improved the record-keeping on this ranch. We have detailed counts of every head of cattle, including the ones your son attempted to steal. Would you like to see the ledgers?" Hartley's face reddened. "Now listen here, Missy. It's Miss Marlowe, and I believe you were listening to me." She came down the porch steps, moving with a grace that belied the trembling Samuel could see in her hands. "Sheriff Collins, I assume you'll want to see our documentation? We have bills of sale for every animal, plus witness statements from 6 men about yesterday's incident." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Well, now, miss, that might not be necessary. Oh, but I insist. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to think the law in this territory is influenced by wealth or political connections, would we?" The threat was subtle, but clear. "Make this official, and everything goes on record." Hartley's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "This isn't over, Granger," he finally said.
You've made an enemy today." "I didn't make anything," Samuel replied. "Your boy did that when he tried to steal from me." After they left, Samuel found Eliza in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to pour coffee. "Here," he said, taking the pot from her. "Sit down." "I shouldn't have interfered," she said. "But when he looked at me like that, talked about me like I was like I was nothing." "You were magnificent," Samuel said firmly. "Hartley's not used to being stood up to, especially not by a woman. You probably saved us a lot of trouble with that ledger talk." "Do we actually have detailed ledgers?" Samuel grinned. "We do now. Better get started on them." She laughed, a shaky sound but genuine. "Samuel Granger, are you actually making a joke?" "Maybe. Don't get used to it." But she was already getting used to it. To him, to the ranch, to this life that was nothing like what she'd imagined when she'd stepped on that train in Boston. And he was getting used to her too. The way she hummed while she worked, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the way she challenged him when he retreated too far into himself. The trouble with Hartley didn't end there. Over the next weeks, small problems began to crop up. Fences cut in the night, water diverted from the creek, a fire set in the north pasture that could have been devastating if Jake hadn't spotted the smoke early. "He's trying to drive us out," Jake said after the third incident. "Wear us down." "Let him try," Samuel said grimly. But it was wearing on them all, especially Eliza. Samuel would find her at the window at odd hours, watching the horizon as if expecting trouble to ride up at any moment. "This is my fault," she said one night. "If I hadn't confronted him—" "This is Hartley's fault," Samuel corrected. "His and his thieving sons. Don't you dare blame yourself." October arrived with golden days and cold nights. Samuel and Eliza had settled into a routine of sorts, careful, respectful, but with an underlying tension that grew stronger each day. They still hadn't crossed certain lines, hadn't kissed, hadn't shared a bed, but the awareness between them was constant, like electricity in the air before a storm. It was Margaret who finally forced the issue, arriving unannounced on a crisp October afternoon. Samuel was in the barn when he heard the buggy, and by the time he reached the house, Margaret was already inside, talking animatedly with Eliza. "Samuel," Margaret exclaimed, turning on him with eyes blazing. "You let me think she'd left. I've been worried sick." "You deserved it," Samuel said flatly, "after what you did." "What I did was try to save you from dying alone like a stubborn mule." Margaret's expression softened as she looked between them. "But it worked, didn't it? You kept her." "She kept herself," Samuel corrected. "Made her own choice." Margaret studied Eliza with sharp eyes. "Are you happy, my dear? Is he treating you well?" "Very well," Eliza replied. "Though he could talk more and brood less." Margaret laughed. "Good luck with that. He's been brooding since he was 10, and Father wouldn't let him keep that wounded hawk he found." "I was not brooding," Samuel protested. "You sat in the barn for 3 days, refusing to speak to anyone," Margaret recalled. "Mother finally had to bribe you out with apple pie." Eliza's eyes lit with interest. "Tell me more about young Samuel." "Oh no," Samuel said. "Margaret, we need to leave." But Margaret was already settling in, and soon she and Eliza were deep in conversation, sharing stories that made Samuel alternately embarrassed and oddly warm. Watching them together, seeing how easily Eliza fit with his sister, something in his chest heaved. Margaret stayed for dinner, and as the evening wore on, Samuel found himself actually enjoying the company. The laughter, the feeling of family that had been absent for so long. "So," Margaret said as dinner ended, "when's the wedding?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Samuel and Eliza carefully didn't look at each other. "Margaret," Samuel started. "Don't Margaret me. You're living here together. The whole territory is talking about it. Either marry her proper or send her back, but don't leave her in this limbo. It's not fair to her." "I think that's between Samuel and me," Eliza said quietly. Margaret looked at her, then at Samuel. "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you're both too scared to take what you obviously want. Samuel, because he thinks he'll be betraying Catherine's memory, and you, my dear, because you think you're not enough to compete with a ghost." "That's enough," Samuel said shortly. "No, it's not." Margaret stood. "Catherine is gone, Samuel. She's been gone for 3 years. And she would hate what you've become, this half-alive thing just going through the motions. She would want you to live, to love, to be happy again. You don't know what she would want. I knew her for 6 years, Samuel. I knew her better than you think. And I know she made me promise, when James was born, that if anything ever happened to her, I'd make sure you didn't shut yourself away. Margaret's voice softened. I failed at that promise for 3 years. But now you have a second chance. Don't waste it. She left soon after, but her words lingered in the air like smoke. Samuel and Eliza cleaned up in silence, neither quite ready to address what had been said. Finally, as they sat by the fire, Eliza spoke. She's right, you know. We can't continue like this indefinitely. I know. So what do we do? Samuel stared into the flames. I don't know how to move forward. Every time I think about us, I feel like I'm betraying them. And every time I think about us, I feel like I'm asking for something I have no right to, Eliza admitted. You loved her completely. How can anyone follow that? You don't follow it, Samuel said, looking at her. It's different. You're different. Different enough? Before Samuel could answer, they heard horses approaching fast. Jake burst through the door a moment later. Boss, we got trouble. Big trouble. Hartley's brought in gunmen from Cheyenne. They're saying we altered our brands, that half our herd is stolen. Samuel was on his feet immediately. How many men? 6, maybe 7, all professionals. They're at Murphy's saloon in town, drinking and talking about riding out here tomorrow to reclaim Hartley's property. Get the boys ready, Samuel said. Will? No. Eliza stood, her face pale but determined. No, this has to stop. Someone's going to get killed. What else can we do? Let them take our cattle? I have an idea, she said, but you have to trust me. The next morning, Eliza rode to town alone, despite Samuel's protest. She walked into Murphy's saloon wearing her best dress, the one she'd been saving, deep blue wool that brought out her eyes. The saloon went quiet as she entered, all eyes on her. The gunmen were at a back table, hard men with cold eyes and well-worn pistols. She walked directly to them. Gentlemen, she said pleasantly, I understand Mr. Hartley has hired you regarding a dispute over cattle. One of them, apparently the leader, leaned back in his chair. That's right, miss. And you are? Eliza Marlowe from the Granger Ranch. I've come to make you a proposition. The man laughed. We don't make deals with... You'll want to hear this one. She pulled out a telegram from her pocket. This is from my cousin in Chicago. He's a federal marshal. I've asked him to investigate Mr. Hartley's interesting business practices, specifically his habit of hiring men to intimidate smaller ranchers into selling their land cheap. The laughter died. You're bluffing. Am I? Eliza pulled out another paper. This is a sworn statement from Tommy Hartley himself, Bill's son, admitting to the rustling. Seems young Tommy doesn't want to hang for his father's ambitions. He was quite talkative when I visited him yesterday. When did you... The leader stopped, studied her more carefully. Mr. Hartley is paying you to start a range war, Eliza continued. But range wars attract federal attention. Marshals start investigating, looking into everyone's background. I wonder what they might find if they looked into yours. The men exchanged glances. One of them stood. We're done here. What about Hartley? The leader asked. Hartley's problems aren't our problems, the first man said. Job's off, boys. As they filed out, the leader paused beside Eliza. You got sand, lady, but you just made a dangerous enemy. I already had one, she replied calmly. When she returned to the ranch, Samuel was pacing the porch like a caged animal. Are you insane? You could have been killed. But I wasn't. How did you even know about Tommy? Eliza smiled. I didn't. But I knew a boy who disappointed his father might be looking for a way out, so I took a chance. You took a chance? Samuel grabbed her shoulders. Eliza, you can't just... I can, and I did. This is my home now, Samuel. I'll defend it just like you would. Your home? Yes. She met his eyes steadily. Unless you're planning to send me away after all. Never, he said fiercely, and then, before he could think better of it, he kissed her. It was nothing like kissing Catherine had been. That had been young love, sweet and eager. This was different, deeper, tinged with loss and longing and the fierce need to live again. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I'm sorry," Samuel started. "I shouldn't have..." Eliza kissed him again, effectively silencing his apology. "Don't you dare apologize for that." But even as they stood there, holding each other, Samuel could feel the weight of the past pulling at him. That night, he walked alone to the graves on the hill, stood beneath the cottonwood tree in the cold October wind. "I don't know how to do this," he said to the silent stones. "I don't know how to love her without feeling like I'm betraying you. But I can't let her go either. She's brought something back to life in me, something I thought died with you." The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment Samuel could almost imagine it was Catherine's voice, telling him what he already knew, that love wasn't finite, that the heart could hold more than one truth at a time. When he returned to the house, Eliza was waiting by the fire. She'd changed into her nightgown and wrapper, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked young and vulnerable and beautiful. "I won't rush you," she said softly. "We have time." "Do we?" Samuel asked. "Hartley won't give up easily. And winter's coming, and there's so much work to do. And Samuel..." She stood, came to him, put her hands on his chest. "We have time. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Isn't that enough for now?" He covered her hands with him. "When did you become the strong one?" "I've always been strong. You just gave me a reason to show it." That night, for the first time, Samuel asked her to stay. Not in his bed. They weren't ready for that yet. But in his room, in the chair by the window where she could read while he tried to sleep. It was a small step, but it was forward motion. "Read to me," he said, surprising himself. Eliza picked up the book she'd brought, a collection of poetry she'd saved from Boston. Her voice was soft in the darkness, reading words about love and loss and the courage to begin again. As October waned, life on the ranch took on new rhythms. The men had accepted Eliza completely, especially after the incident with the gunman. Tom Bradley had even started calling her Miss Eliza, with something approaching awe. She faced down 7 hired guns, he told anyone who would listen. Cool as spring water. Hartley made one more attempt to cause trouble, trying to block their access to the water rights, but Eliza had anticipated that too. She'd spent days in town researching old claims and property lines, finding documentation that predated Hartley's ownership of the neighboring land. "Where did you learn all this?" Samuel asked, watching her work through legal documents by lamplight. "The boarding house where I lived was owned by a retired lawyer, Mr. Pemberton. He taught me that the law is just another kind of pattern, like sewing. You just have to find the right thread to pull." "You're remarkable," Samuel said without thinking. She looked up at him, surprise and pleasure warming her features. "Am I?" "Yes." They were at the table, paper spread between them, and suddenly the distance seemed too great. Samuel stood, came around to her side, pulled her to her feet. "Eliza, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm not good at this, at saying what I feel. Catherine used to tease me about it, said getting emotions out of me was like pulling teeth. But you need to know, these past weeks you've made me remember what it feels like to be alive. Really alive, not just existing. Samuel, let me finish. I can't promise I'll ever be whole again. There are pieces of me that died with them, that are buried on that hill. But what's left? It's yours, if you want it." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "I want it. I want all of it. The broken pieces, the sharp edges, the parts that still belong to them. I want the whole complicated truth of you." This time when they kissed, it was with a different kind of promise. Not the promise of forever. They'd both learned how fragile forever could be. But the promise of now, of choosing each other despite the ghosts and the uncertainties. That night, Eliza didn't sleep in the chair. She lay beside Samuel, fully clothed, on top of the covers, but beside him nonetheless. He held her carefully, like something that might break or disappear, and she let herself be held, feeling for the first time since she'd left Boston that she might actually be home. The first snow came early that year, falling softly in the last days of October. Samuel woke to find Eliza at the window, watching the white blanket cover the ranch. "It's beautiful," she said. "I've seen snow in the city, but not like this. So clean and perfect." "Wait until January," Samuel said, joining her. "You'll be sick of it." "Maybe, but right now it feels like a fresh start, like the world is giving us a clean slate." Samuel wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her head. I've been thinking about what Margaret said. About the wedding. Eliza tensed slightly. Oh? The creek will freeze soon, make it hard to get to town. If we're going to do it, we should do it before winter really sets in. Is that a proposal, Samuel Granger? He turned her to face him. It's a practical consideration. How romantic! He smiled, the expression still rare enough to transform his face. Eliza Marlowe, you came here as a mail-order bride. Seems only right to make it official. That's slightly better. Will you marry me? Not because of Margaret or the territory gossips, or even because it's practical, but because I want to wake up every morning knowing you're here, that you chose this life, chose me, despite everything. I chose you the moment I got off that train, Eliza said. I just didn't know it yet. They were married the second week of November, in the small church in Cedar Creek. Margaret stood as witness, along with Jake, and surprisingly, the sheriff, who'd apparently been impressed by Eliza's handling of the Hartley situation. Eliza wore the blue dress she'd worn to face down the gunman. It's my brave dress, she said, with wildflowers from the sheltered spots where they still grew. Samuel wore his best suit, the one he hadn't worn since Catherine's funeral, but somehow it felt right, like closing one chapter properly before beginning another. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when the minister asked if anyone objected, Samuel half expected to hear something, thunder maybe, or a voice from the past. Instead, there was only silence and Margaret's quiet sniffling. You may kiss your bride, the minister said, and Samuel did. There in the small church, with winter light streaming through the windows, kissing Eliza like she was both an ending and a beginning, which perhaps she was. The reception was at the ranch, the house full of people for the first time in 3 years. The ranch hands had decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, and Jake had somehow procured a fiddle player from town. Samuel watched Eliza dance with Tom Bradley, laughing as the young cowboy stepped on her feet, and felt something he hadn't expected, not just acceptance, but actual happiness. She's good for you, Margaret said, appearing at his elbow. You look more alive than you have in years. I feel it, Samuel admitted. Catherine would be glad. Would she? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Do you remember what she said when James was born? She said love multiplies, it doesn't divide. That loving him didn't mean she loved you less, just that her heart got bigger. I think she'd say the same about this. As the evening wore on and the guests gradually left, Samuel and Eliza found themselves alone by the fire. She'd changed into a nightgown, a new one, white with tiny blue flowers embroidered at the neck, and her hair was down, glowing auburn in the firelight. So, Mrs. Granger, Samuel said, testing the words. Mr. Granger, she replied with a smile. Are you happy? Yes. Are you? Samuel considered the question. I'm something. Not happy exactly, not yet, but closer to it than I've been in a long time. That's enough, Eliza said. That's more than enough. That night, they truly became husband and wife. It was awkward at first, both of them carrying their own griefs and fears. But then Eliza laughed at something. Samuel couldn't even remember what. And suddenly it was just them, just two people choosing each other despite all the reasons not to. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Eliza traced the scar on Samuel's arm from the rustler's bullet. We're both marked, she said. By loss, by life? But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it means we can understand each other in ways that unmarked people couldn't. Maybe, Samuel agreed, pulling her closer. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white, covering the old tracks and scars, preparing the ground for whatever would grow come spring. And in the house that had been silent for so long, two people held each other through the night, building something new from the pieces of what had been broken. Winter settled over the Montana ranch like a heavy quilt, transforming the landscape into something both beautiful and treacherous. The morning after their wedding night, Samuel woke to find Eliza already up, standing at the bedroom window in her wrapper, watching the snow fall in thick, silent curtains. Come back to bed, he said, his voice rough with sleep. It's barely dawn. She turned to him with a smile that made his chest tight. I can't sleep. Everything feels different now, real in a way it wasn't before. Samuel understood what she meant.
The simple exchange of vows, the gold band now on her finger, Catherine's ring, which Margaret had saved and insisted Eliza wear, had shifted something fundamental. They were no longer two people carefully dancing around each other's wounds. They were married, bound by law and promise, and something deeper that neither quite had words for yet. "The cattle will need extra feed today," Samuel said, sitting up. "The snow's going to get worse before it gets better." "Then we'd better get started," Eliza said, already reaching for her cloak. "We? I'm a rancher's wife now, aren't I? Time I learned what that really means." Over the following weeks, Eliza threw herself into learning the ranch's winter operations with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. She helped with feeding, learned to spot signs of illness in the cattle, even assisted when they had to pull a calf from a snowdrift where it had wandered and gotten stuck. "You don't have to do this," Samuel told her one afternoon, watching her struggle through deep snow with a bucket of grain. "The men and I can handle it." "I know I don't have to," she panted, setting down the bucket to catch her breath. "But I want to understand what you do, what this life really is. Not just the cooking and cleaning part, but all of it." It was Tom Bradley who mentioned the ledger one evening when the hands came in for supper. "Miss Mrs. Granger, you might want to look at the count from the south pasture. Something's off." Eliza examined the ledger while the men ate. "You're right, we're missing 20 head. Samuel looked over her shoulder. "You sure? I've been keeping my own counts when I go out with you. See?" She showed him her notebook, neat columns of numbers. "We had 127 in that pasture last week. Now there's 107. Jake whistled low. "In this weather? No rustlers that crazy." "Unless they're desperate," Samuel said grimly. "Or it's not rustlers at all. Could be wolves or a cougar. We'll check in the morning." But that night, the storm that had been building for days finally hit in full force. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontal across the windows. The house shook with the force of it, and even with the fire roaring, cold seeped in through every crack. "I've never seen anything like this," Eliza said, pressed against Samuel's side in bed, listening to the storm rage. "This is nothing. Wait till January." But Samuel's voice was worried. In weather like this, cattle could drift for miles, pile up against fence lines and suffocate, or freeze standing up. By morning, the wind had died, but the snow was still falling. Samuel couldn't even open the front door. It was blocked by a drift. He had to climb out through an upstairs window and dig his way down to clear it. "Stay inside, Samson," he told Eliza. "Jake and I will check the herds." "Like hell," she said, already pulling on the men's clothes she'd altered to fit her. Those missing cattle could be the difference between profit and loss this year. "I'm coming." They found the missing cattle 2 miles from where they should have been, huddled against a rock face. They also found something else, wolf tracks, fresh ones, and blood in the snow. "Lost at least 3, Jake said, reading the signs. "Packs probably holed up nearby, waiting for another chance." "We'll need to post guards," Samuel said. "Can't afford to lose more." That night, Eliza surprised them all. "I can take a watch." The men looked at her skeptically. Even Samuel shook his head. "Eliza, you don't know how to shoot." "Then teach me." So Samuel did, setting up targets behind the barn. Eliza's first shots went wild. The rifle's kick nearly knocking her down. But she was determined, practicing until her shoulder was bruised and her hands were steady. Didn't sleep, knowing she was out there, and finally joined her at the watch post. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Bed's cold without you." It was the closest he'd come to a romantic declaration since their wedding, and Eliza's smile was radiant even in the darkness. They sat together, watching the snow-covered landscape under the stars, the silence broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle. "I never thought I'd end up here," Eliza said quietly. "When I was a girl in Boston, I dreamed of marrying a shopkeeper, maybe having a little house with a garden. This..." She gestured at the vast white expanse. "This is nothing like what I imagined." Disappointed? "No. It's harder than I imagined, but also more. Does that make sense?" "Yeah," Samuel said. "It does." A movement in the shadows caught his attention. "There," he whispered, pointing. The wolves emerged from the tree line like ghosts, 5 of them, their eyes glowing in the moonlight.
The lead wolf was massive, scarred, clearly old and cunning.
"Don't shoot unless they come closer," Samuel said softly. "Sometimes they're just scouting." But the wolves began to advance, spreading out in hunting formation. The cattle, sensing danger, began to mill nervously. "Now," Samuel said. Eliza's first shot was perfect, kicking up snow right in front of the lead wolf. The pack scattered immediately, melting back into the forest. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Will they come back?" "Not tonight, but we'll need to do something about them soon. Can't have them picking off cattle all winter." The solution came from an unexpected source. Bill Hartley arrived 3 days later, alone, looking older and somehow smaller than he had in the fall. "Granger," he said, standing in the snow outside the house. "We need to talk." Samuel's hand went to his gun, but Hartley held up both hands. "I'm not here for trouble. Wolves are hitting my herds too. Lost 10 head this week." "That's your problem," Samuel said coldly. "It's our problem. That pack doesn't respect property lines. I'm proposing a joint hunt. My men and yours working together. Better chance of getting them all." Eliza appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Hartley." The older man's jaw tightened, but he touched his hat. "Mrs. Granger, I heard you married. Congratulations." "Thank you." Her voice was neutral, polite. "Would you like to come in? It's cold." Samuel shot her a look, but she ignored it. After a moment, Hartley stepped inside, looking uncomfortable in the house of people he'd tried to ruin. Over coffee, they worked out the details. The joint hunt would happen in 3 days, giving both ranches time to prepare. As Hartley was leaving, he paused at the door. "I was wrong," he said, not quite looking at either of them. "About the rustling, about all of it. My boy, he's gone east. Said he wanted nothing to do with the ranch anymore." His voice was bitter. "Seems I drove away the one thing I was trying to protect." After he left, Samuel and Eliza stood in the doorway, watching his lonely figure ride away. "People can change," Eliza said softly. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just desperate." The wolf hunt was brutal and efficient. 12 men from both ranches, moving in coordination, tracked the pack to their den in a box canyon. The shooting was over quickly, 5 wolves dead, including the scarred leader. Samuel felt no joy in it, just grim necessity. These wolves had been magnificent creatures, but they were also a threat to survival. That night, there was an awkward celebration at Murphy's Saloon. Hartley's men, and Samuel's maintaining a careful distance. But whiskey has a way of breaking down barriers, and by midnight, Tom Bradley was arm wrestling one of Hartley's cowboys while others placed bets. "Strange bedfellows," Jake commented, joining Samuel in the bar. "Necessity makes compromises of us all," Samuel replied. He looked across the room to where Eliza sat with some of the other ranchers' wives who'd come to town for supplies. She was laughing at something Mrs. Patterson was saying, her face animated, belonging in a way that seemed both natural and miraculous. "You did good, boss," Jake said, following his gaze. "She's good for this place. Good for you." December brought deeper snow and a different kind of challenge. Margaret sent word that she was ill, nothing serious but enough that she needed help. Samuel couldn't leave the ranch, not with the weather so unpredictable. So Eliza went alone, taking the train from Cedar Creek. She was gone 5 days, the longest they'd been apart since she'd decided to stay. Samuel found himself walking through the house at odd hours, missing her presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. The house felt empty again, but different from before. Not the emptiness of death, but of temporary absence, which somehow was both better and worse. When she returned, coming through the door with snowflakes in her hair and her cheeks red from cold, Samuel pulled her into his arms without a word, held her so tight she gasped. "I missed you too," she said into his chest. That night she told him about Margaret's illness, just a bad cold that had settled in her chest, but also about the conversations they'd had. "She told me about Catherine's pregnancies," Eliza said carefully. "The 2 she lost before James." Samuel stiffened. "She had no right. She thought I should know, in case..." Eliza took a breath. "Samuel, I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Samuel felt something cold and hot at the same time flood through him. "How long have you suspected?" "A few weeks. I wasn't sure. Didn't want to say anything until..."
She watched his face anxiously. Are you angry? No, God, no. He didn't know what he was. Terrified, hopeful, desperate, all of it at once. Are you sure? Pretty sure. Margaret confirmed the signs. Samuel sat heavily in a chair, his mind spinning. A baby. Another child. Another chance to lose everything. Samuel? Eliza knelt beside him, took his hands. Talk to me. I can't lose you, he said roughly. Not you too. You won't. You can't promise that. No, she agreed. I can't. But Samuel, we can't live our whole lives afraid of loss. That's not living at all. She was right, he knew. But knowing and feeling were different things. That night he held her carefully, as if she might break, until she laughed and told him she wasn't made of glass. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, she said. I'll be fine. But Samuel had heard those words before, from Catherine, after her first loss, after her second. He'd believed them then, too. Christmas came with a break in the weather, unexpected sunshine that made the snow-covered ranch sparkle like diamond. Samuel had never been one for holidays, not since Catherine and James, but Eliza was determined. She decorated the house with pine boughs and ribbons, made cookies from recipes Margaret had given her, even convinced Samuel to help her pick out a small tree from the woods. This is silly, he said, but he was smiling as he said it, watching her tie red ribbons on the branches. Silly is good sometimes, she replied. Besides, next year there will be 3 of us. We should start some traditions now. Next year, 3 of us. The words should have terrified him, but instead, Samuel felt something else. A tentative hope, fragile as new ice, but there nonetheless. On Christmas Eve, they had dinner with the Hands who couldn't make it home. Tom Bradley, whose family was in Texas, and 2 others. Jake had gone to visit his sister, but he'd left a gift, a wooden cradle he'd been working on in secret. Jake knew? Samuel asked. Jake knows everything, Eliza said, running her hands over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. That night, as they lay in bed listening to the wind sing through the eaves, Eliza said, I have something for you. She pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a watch, silver, with an inscription. For all our times to come, E. It was my father's, she explained. The one thing I didn't sell. I wanted you to have it. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he got up, went to the dresser, pulled something from the back of a drawer. It was a small wooden box, worn smooth with handling. This was Catherine's, he said, opening it. Inside was a simple gold locket. She wore it every day. I buried her with the one that had James's picture, but this one, he opened it. One side held a tiny photograph of Catherine herself, young and smiling. The other was empty. I thought maybe you could put your picture in the other side, not to replace her, but alongside both parts of my life. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Samuel, would that be strange? No, it's perfect. It's exactly right. January brought blizzards that kept them housebound for days at a time. Eliza's pregnancy progressed, her belly beginning to round under her dresses. Samuel watched the changes with a mixture of wonder and terror. One night, as they lay together, he felt the baby move for the first time. Just a flutter against his palm, but unmistakably real. There, Eliza said, pressing his hand to the spot. Feel that? He did, and something in his chest cracked open, all the careful walls he built suddenly seeming pointless against this evidence of new life. What if I'm not good enough? He asked in the darkness. What if I fail this child like I failed James? You didn't fail James. He died of fever. It wasn't your fault. I should have gotten the doctor sooner. Should have... Samuel stopped. Eliza turned to face him. You can't protect everyone from everything. All you can do is love them while you have them. I don't know if I'm strong enough to love like that again. You already are, she said. You love me, don't you? Yes. The word came out fierce, undeniable. Then you're strong enough. But February brought troubles that had nothing to do with the weather. Bill Hartley's son Tommy returned from the east, bringing with him investors interested in buying up ranch land for mining operations. The offers were generous, too generous, and several smaller ranchers were considering selling. If they sell, we'll be surrounded by mining operations, Jake said during one of their planning meetings. Water rights will be a nightmare, not to mention what it'll do to the grazing land. We won't sell, Samuel said firmly. Neither will I, Hartley said. He'd started joining their meetings, an uneasy alliance born of mutual necessity. But if enough others do,
then we need to convince them not to, Eliza said. She was knitting by the fire, her movement steady despite the tension in the room. What if we formed a cattlemen's association, pooled resources, shared drives to market, make it more profitable to ranch than to sell? The men looked at her with surprise, then growing interest. That could work, Hartley said slowly. Strength in numbers. We'd need bylaws, agreements, Samuel pointed out. I can help with that, Eliza offered. I learned a lot from Mr. Pemberton about contracts and legal documents. So, through the rest of February, as her belly grew rounder and the baby's movements grew stronger, Eliza worked on creating the framework for the Cedarwood Cattlemen's Association. She wrote letters, drafted agreements, hosted meetings where ranchers' wives served coffee and persuasion in equal measure.
You're remarkable, Samuel told her one night, watching her work by lamplight, one hand on her belly, the other holding a pen. I'm practical, she corrected. This is our children's future we're protecting. Children, plural. Samuel's heart stuttered at the word, but he was learning to live with that particular fear, to let hope exist alongside it. The association was formalized in early March with 15 ranches signed on. Tommy Hartley's investors retreated, looking for easier prey, and for the first time, Samuel felt like they were building something larger than just their own survival. But as spring approached and Eliza entered her final months of pregnancy, Samuel's fears grew stronger. She was so small, and the baby seemed so large. The doctor from town, when he visited, was reassuring but careful. Everything looks fine, he said, but Mrs. Granger, you'll need to take it easier. No more working with the cattle, no more long days on your feet. Eliza chafed at the restrictions, but submitted when she saw how worried Samuel was. She spent her days sewing tiny clothes, preparing the nursery, Catherine's sewing room, transformed, and teaching Tom Bradley to read better. Never had much schooling, the young cowboy admitted shyly, but if there's going to be association meetings and such, I ought to be able to read the documents. It was during one of these lessons that Eliza's pains began. Samuel was in the barn when Tom came running. Boss, it's time! The next 12 hours were the longest of Samuel's life. The doctor came, Margaret arrived on the evening train, and still Eliza labored. Samuel paced the hallway, listening to her cries, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt. She's strong, Margaret said, gripping his arm. Stronger than you know. Catherine was strong too, Samuel said bleakly. This isn't Catherine, this is Eliza. Different woman, different story. Just after midnight, a new cry joined Eliza's. High, angry, absolutely loud. Samuel's knees nearly buckled with rage. The doctor appeared in the doorway, smiling. You have a son, Mr. Granger. Healthy and loud. Samuel pushed past him into the room. Eliza lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a wrapped bundle. Come meet your son, she said. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like Samuel's. When Samuel touched his tiny fist, the baby gripped his finger with surprising strength. What should we call him? Eliza asked. Samuel had been thinking about this for months, wrestling with the desire to honor the past while embracing the future. William, he said finally. William James Granger, after your father and... He swallowed. And his brother. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. It's perfect. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the mountains pink and gold, Samuel sat beside his wife and new son, feeling something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Complete. Not the same completeness he'd known with Catherine and James, but a new kind, built on second chances and the courage to love despite the risk of loss. I love you, he told Eliza. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it felt different now, fuller somehow. I love you too, she replied. Thank you for being brave enough to let me stay. Thank you for being brave enough to make me. The baby stirred, making small sounds, and Samuel touched his impossibly soft cheek.
This child would grow up knowing about the brother who came before, about the ranch's history, about the graves on the hill. But he would also know about resilience, about love that persists despite loss, about the courage it takes to begin again. Outside, the ranch was waking up. Jake would be organizing the morning feeding, Tom would be checking the early calves. Bill Hartley would probably stop by later. He'd become an unlikely friend through their shared struggles. The association would meet next week to plan the spring drive. Life would go on, with its rhythms of work and rest, loss and renewal, sorrow and joy intertwined like prairie grass roots, impossible to separate. And in this house that had known such grief, a new story was beginning. Not replacing the old one, but growing alongside it, like wildflowers blooming beside grave markers, proof that life insists on continuing, that love endures in whatever form it takes. The spring that followed William's birth brought changes to the ranch that went deeper than the seasonal thaw. Samuel found himself walking differently through his days, no longer the careful, measured steps of a man avoiding memories, but with purpose that came from having something to protect beyond just land and cattle. He would stand at the window in the early morning, watching Eliza nurse their son as the sun painted the mountains gold, and feel something he'd thought was lost forever, the weight of happiness, heavy and warm in his chest. "You're staring again," Eliza would say without looking up, a smile in her voice. "Can't help it," he'd reply. And it was true. He couldn't help watching them. This woman who'd arrived with 17 cents and a single tear, now holding his son with sure hands, humming lullabies she'd learned from her Boston mother. William was a demanding baby, crying at all hours, refusing to follow any schedule Eliza tried to establish. But even his cries didn't haunt Samuel the way he'd feared they would. This wasn't James's cry echoing from memory. This was William, stubbornly alive and making sure everyone knew it. It was during one of those sleepless nights, walking the floor with William while Eliza caught a few precious hours of rest, that Samuel found himself at the window overlooking the hill with its two graves. The cottonwood was beginning to bud, new green against the darkness. "Your brother would have loved you," he whispered to the baby. "Would have been the best big brother, teaching you to ride, getting you into trouble." William's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Samuel felt that familiar tightness in his throat. "I'll tell you about him when you're older. About both of them. You should know where you come from." The baby gurgled, and Samuel could have sworn it sounded like agreement. The spring cattle drive was approaching, and for the first time, Samuel was reluctant to leave. The drive to the railroad at Miles City would take 3 weeks, maybe more if the weather turned. "I could stay behind this year," he told Jake one morning as they reviewed the herd counts. "Let you take the lead." Jake looked at him sharply. "You haven't missed a drive in 8 years. Things are different now." "That they are." Jake glanced toward the house where Eliza was hanging laundry, William in a sling against her chest. "But boss, the men need to see you there, especially with the association's first coordinated drive. Hartley can't lead it alone." Samuel knew he was right. The association had agreed to combine herds for the drive, sharing costs and risks. It was a new way of doing things, one that required trust that was still fragile between former rivals. That evening, he discussed it with Eliza as she prepared dinner, William sleeping in the cradle Jake had made. "You should go," she said without hesitation. "This is important for our future. 3 weeks is a long time. I'll have Margaret. She's already planning to come stay." Eliza turned from the stove, touched his face. "Samuel, I knew what this life was when I chose to stay. The ranch doesn't stop for anything, not even babies." "You sound like Catherine," he said without thinking, then froze, worried he hurt her. But Eliza smiled. "Good. She sounds like she was a wise woman." The night before the drive, Samuel couldn't sleep. He stood over William's cradle, memorizing the curve of his cheek, the way his fists curled against his chest. At 2 months old, the baby was already showing personality. Stubborn like his father, Tom Bradley said, though Samuel suspected the stubbornness came from both sides. "Don't let him forget me," Samuel said to Eliza, who'd come to stand beside him. 3 weeks isn't long enough to forget," she assured him. "Besides, I'll tell him stories about his father every day. How you built this house, how you saved the ranch from rustlers, how you were brave enough to love again." "That was your bravery, not mine." "It was both." The morning of departure came gray and cool. Samuel kissed Eliza goodbye at the door. then kissed her again, unable to quite let go. "Go," she said, laughing even as tears gathered in her eyes. "Before I decide to be selfish and keep you here." The combined herd was massive, nearly 2,000 head from 8 ranches. Samuel rode point with Hartley, their past animosity set aside for the common goal. Behind them stretched a river of cattle, raising dust that could be seen for miles. "Never thought I'd be riding beside you peacefully," Hartley commented on the second day. "Things change," Samuel replied. "That they do. That wife of yours, she's got a way of changing things." "She does." Hartley was quiet for a moment. "My boy Tommy wrote. Says he's studying law back east. Wants to be a judge someday. That's good." "Well, maybe. Would have preferred he stayed. Took over the ranch. But young people got their own ideas these days." He glanced at Samuel. "Your boy will probably be the same. Have his own mind about things." "Probably," Samuel agreed, but he was smiling as he said it. The idea of William growing up to have his own mind, his own choices, was a gift he hadn't been sure he'd get to see. The drive went smoothly for the first week. The weather held, the cattle moved well, and the cooperation between the different ranch crews worked better than expected. Tom Bradley had become something of a leader among the younger cowboys, his reading lessons with Eliza giving him confidence to help with the record keeping. It was on the 8th night that trouble came. Samuel woke to shouts and gunfire. Scrambling from his bedroll, he saw riders circling the herd trying to cut out cattle in the confusion. "Rustlers," Jake shouted. 20, maybe more. This wasn't like the amateur attempt by Tom and Hartley. These were professionals, organized and armed. Samuel grabbed his rifle, joining the fight that was already spreading through the camp. The battle was chaos, cattle bellowing, men shouting, guns firing in the darkness. Samuel lost track of individual moments, focused only on protecting the herd, protecting his men. At one point, he found himself back-to-back with Bill Hartley, both of them firing at rustlers trying to flank them. "Just like the old days," Hartley shouted over the noise, and Samuel realized the man was actually grinning. Except then, we were shooting at each other. When dawn finally came, the rustlers had been driven off, but the cost was evident. 3 men wounded, including Tom Bradley, who'd taken a bullet in the shoulder. They lost maybe 50 head, scattered in the chaos. "Could have been worse," Jake said, helping bandage Tom's shoulder. "Could have been better," Samuel replied grimly. He was thinking of Eliza, of William, of what would have happened if that bullet had found him instead of Tom. They pushed on, reaching Miles City after 2.5 weeks. The cattle brought good prices. The combined negotiating power of the association proved its worth. Samuel found himself actually celebrating with the other ranchers, sharing drinks and stories in a way he hadn't in years. "To the association," Hartley toasted, "and to the women who pushed us stubborn fools into it." "To the women," the others echoed, and Samuel thought of Eliza, probably sitting by the fire now, William in her arms, waiting. He bought presents in Miles City, a music box for Eliza, a wooden horse for William even though the baby was too young for it, fabric for Margaret. The other men teased him about going soft, but there was no real mockery in it. They all understood how the world looked different when you had someone waiting at home. The return journey was faster without the cattle. Samuel pushed hard, eager to be back, and even the usually stoic Jake commented on the pace. "Ranch isn't going anywhere, boss." "I know, Samuel couldn't explain the urgency he felt, the need to see them, to confirm they were real and safe. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the ranch spread below, Samuel's throat tightened. Smoke rose from the chimney, laundry flapped on the line, and there was Eliza in the garden she'd planted, William in his sling, bent over what looked like young tomato plants. She looked up at the sound of horses, shaded her eyes, then broke into a run. Samuel dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, catching her as she threw herself into his arms, William protesting between them. "You're back," she said into his chest. "You're back safe." "I'm back," he confirmed, then pulled back to look at William, who seemed to have doubled in size in 3 weeks. "Look at him. He's huge." "He eats constantly," Eliza laughed. "Margaret says he's making up for lost time, going to be bigger than you." That evening, after the crew had been fed and the stories of the drive told and retold,
Samuel and Eliza sat on the porch, William sleeping in Samuel's arms. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and rose. "I have news," Eliza said. "Good news, I think. The Petersons, from the small ranch north of town, they're looking to sell. Already? They just started 3 years ago. Mrs. Peterson's mother is ill back in Ohio. They need to go back. They're asking a fair price, and Samuel..." She took a breath. "I think we should buy it." Samuel looked at her in surprise. "That's a big decision. It would double our grazing land, and with the association doing so well, we could manage it. Jake's been training Tom to take on more responsibility. We could hire more hands. You've thought this through." "I've had 3 weeks to think," she smiled. "Margaret helped with the figures." "It makes sense, Samuel, for William's future." Samuel looked down at his son, then out at the land stretching toward the mountains. 4 years ago, he'd been content to let this ranch slowly die with him. Now he was discussing expansion, planning for a future that stretched beyond his own lifetime. "All right," he said. "We'll look into it." Eliza kissed his cheek. "I knew you'd see sense." "You mean you knew I'd agree with you?" "Same thing." The Peterson ranch purchase went through in early summer. It came with its own challenges: fences to repair, wells to dig, a small house that would serve as quarters for the additional hands they'd need to hire. Samuel found himself busier than he'd been in years, but it was a good busy, purposeful rather than desperate. William grew the summer, learning to roll over, to grab at things, to laugh, a sound that never failed to stop Samuel in his tracks. The baby was fascinated by the horses, reaching for them whenever Samuel carried him to the barn. "He's going to be a horseman," Jake predicted. "Can see it in his eyes." "He's 4 months old," Samuel protested, but secretly he was pleased. He'd already picked out a gentle pony for when William was old enough. It was in August that Margaret arrived with unexpected news. She was engaged to a widower from Billings, a merchant named Charles Hammond, who had 2 young daughters. "At my age," she said, blushing like a girl. "Can you imagine? You're 36, not 90, Eliza laughed, bouncing William on her knee, "and you deserve happiness." "But Billings," Samuel said, "that's a full day's travel." "I know, but Charles can't leave his business, and I..." Margaret looked at them, her eyes filling. "I've been alone a long time. I want what you have, a partner, a family." Samuel surprised himself by standing and pulling his sister into a hug. "Then you should have it." The wedding was set for October, and Margaret threw herself into preparations with an enthusiasm that reminded Samuel of when they were children, before life had gotten so complicated. Meanwhile, the ranch thrived. The additional land from the Peterson place allowed them to increase the herd, and the association's second drive was being planned for fall. Eliza had started keeping bees, of all things, saying they needed them for the garden and might as well have honey to sell too. "You're turning us into an empire," Samuel teased one evening, finding her checking the hives and the ridiculous veiled hat she'd ordered from the catalog. "Hardly an empire, but maybe something that will last." She lifted the veil to look at him. "Something William can be proud of." It was that same week that Tom Bradley came to Samuel with his own news. "I'd like to court Jenny Morrison," he said, his face red but determined. "Jake's daughter." Samuel managed not to smile. He'd seen this coming for months. "Have you talked to Jake?" "Wanted to talk to you first, make sure it wouldn't cause problems with the ranch." "Tom, you're one of the best hands I've got. Jenny could do a lot worse." The young man's face lit up. "So you don't mind?" "I don't mind, but Jake might. Better bring your courage when you talk to him." As it turned out, Jake had seen it coming too. "Boy's got promise," he told Samuel later, "and Jenny's had her eye on him for a year. Might as well make it official." September brought unexpected challenges. A drought that had been threatening all summer finally took hold, streams running low, grass turning brown earlier than usual. The association met an emergency session trying to figure out how to manage water rights without starting the kind of range wars that had torn apart other territories. It was Eliza who suggested the rotation system. If we schedule water access, make sure everyone gets their fair share, we can make it through until the rains come. "That's assuming the rains do come," Hartley pointed out. "They always have before," Eliza replied with the confidence Samuel wished he felt. The system worked, mostly. There were disagreements, some heated arguments, but the association held. Samuel found himself mediating disputes, using skills he didn't know he had, finding compromises that kept the peace. One evening, exhausted from a particularly contentious meeting, he came home to find Eliza teaching William to crawl. The baby was up on all fours, rocking back and forth, his face screwed up in concentration. "Come on, sweet boy," Eliza coaxed. "You can do it." William lurched forward, more of a fall than a crawl, but Eliza cheered as if he'd run a mile. Samuel's exhaustion fell away as he watched them, his wife and son on the floor in the lamplight, making miracles out of ordinary moments. "How was the meeting?" Eliza asked, not looking up from William. "We didn't kill each other, so I'd call it a success." The bar for success is pretty low these days. She scooped up William, who was getting frustrated with his effort. "This drought has everyone on edge, including me," Samuel admitted, sitting down beside them. "If we don't get rain soon, we'll manage. We always do." She handed William to him. "Hold your son. It helps." It did help. William grabbed at Samuel's face, babbling something that might have been Papa, but was probably just sounds. Still, Samuel chose to believe it was intentional. "Your first word better be Papa," he told the baby. "Your mother's been coaching you to say Mama for weeks." "It's not a competition," Eliza said primly, then ruined it by adding, "But he'll say Mama first, I guarantee it." The drought broke in late September with a storm that was almost biblical in its intensity. Samuel woke to thunder that shook the house and lightning that turned night into day. William was crying, and Eliza was already up, trying to comfort him. "It's all right," she murmured. "Just rain. We need rain." But this was more than rain. By morning, the creek had jumped its banks and parts of the lower pasture were flooded. 2 calves were lost, swept away despite the men's efforts to save them. "From drought to flood," Jake said, surveying the damage. "Someone up there's got a sense of humor." But the rain had done its job. The grass greened up almost overnight, the wells refilled, and the tension that had been building in the community eased. The association's fall meeting was almost cheerful, ranchers joking about building arks and teaching cattle to swim. Margaret's wedding took place on a perfect October day, the kind where the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Samuel walked her down the aisle of the Billings church, feeling the weight of their father's absence, but also a lightness he hadn't expected. "Be happy," he told her at the altar. "I already am," she replied, and he could see it was true. At the reception, held in the Grand Hotel that Charles Hammond partially owned, Samuel watched Eliza dance with William in her arms, the baby laughing at the movement. Other couples swirled around them, Tom and Jenny, who'd gotten engaged the week before, Jake and his wife, even Bill Hartley with a widow from town who'd been quietly courting. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hartley said, coming to stand beside Samuel. Sam Granger at a society wedding, looking almost happy. "Things change," Samuel said, his standard response to observations about his transformation. "They do indeed. That wife of yours, she saved us both, I think. Made us remember there's more to life than land and cattle." Samuel watched Eliza laugh as Tom Bradley attempted to teach her some complicated dance step. William still in her arms, perfectly content in the chaos. "Yeah," he agreed. "She did." That winter was milder than the previous one, which was fortunate because Eliza was pregnant again. This time, Samuel's fear was tempered with experience. He'd survived William's birth, watched his son grow strong and healthy. Maybe, just maybe, they could do this again. "A girl this time," Eliza predicted, her hand on her growing belly. "I can feel it." "You said that about William too," Samuel reminded her. "Said he felt like a girl." "I've learned since then. This one's different, quieter, more thoughtful." "She's a baby. How thoughtful can she be?" But Eliza was right, as she often was. When the baby came in March, after a labor that was mercifully shorter than William's, it was indeed a girl. She was tiny, perfect, with Eliza's auburn hair and a chin that was pure Granger stubbornness. "Catherine," Eliza said, looking at Samuel. "I'd like to name her Catherine, if that's all right." Samuel's throat closed entirely. He looked at this tiny girl, his daughter, then at his wife, who understood that honoring the past didn't diminish the present. "Catherine Elizabeth Granger," he managed, after both her mothers. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. Both her mothers, I like that. William, now a year old and walking with the determination of someone with places to go, was fascinated by his sister. He would stand by her cradle for long minutes, patting her head with surprising gentleness, saying, "Baby," over and over. He's going to be protective, Jake predicted. Can see it already. The ranch continued to prosper. The association's spring drive brought record prices, and several new families moved into the territory, drawn by stories of cooperation rather than conflict. The Peterson house had been fixed up and now housed Tom and Jenny Bradley, married that spring in a ceremony that had half the territory in attendance. Samuel stood on his porch one evening in late spring, watching the sun set over land that stretched as far as he could see. His land, doubled now, worked by good men, protected by cooperation with neighbors who'd become friends. Inside, he could hear Eliza singing to the children, William's voice trying to join in, Catherine's soft coos. 4 years ago, he'd stood on this same porch, ready to send away a woman he didn't want. Now he couldn't imagine life without her, without the family they'd built, without the future they were creating together. The graves on the hill were still there, still visited, still honored. But they no longer defined the boundaries of his world. That world had expanded to include new love, new life, new possibilities he'd never thought he'd want again. "Papa!" William called from inside. "Papa, come!" Samuel smiled and went inside where his son was building something with blocks, while Eliza nursed Catherine by the fire. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way except that it was his, theirs, real and present and alive with promise. "What are you building?" he asked William. "House," the boy said proudly. "Big house." "That's right," Samuel said, sitting down beside him. "We're building something big here, something that will last." Eliza looked up at him, that smile that had first caught him on the train platform, now familiar but no less powerful. "Yes," she said simply. "We are." Outside, the ranch settled into evening, cattle lowing, horses nickering in the barn, the endless Montana wind singing through the grass. Inside, a family that shouldn't exist, born of loss and accident and mail-order promises, continued the long work of building a life together, one ordinary, precious day at a time. The years that followed seemed to pass with the rhythm of the seasons themselves, each one adding layers to the life Samuel and Eliza had built together. Little Catherine grew from a quiet baby into a thoughtful child who would sit for hours watching her father work with the horses, her green eyes, so like her mother's, taking in everything with the seriousness that belied her young age. William, now 3, was her opposite in every way, charging through life with an enthusiasm that left them all breathless. "He's going to give us gray hair before we're 40, Eliza said one morning, watching William attempt to climb the corral fence to get closer to the horses. Samuel caught him just as he reached the top rail, swinging him up onto his shoulder. "You're already beautiful with gray hair," Samuel replied, noting the few silver strands that had appeared at Eliza's temples since Catherine's birth. "Flatterer," she said, but she was smiling as she shifted Catherine to her other hip. "Don't think sweet words will make me forget you promised to fix the chicken coop today." It was true. The chicken coop had needed repairs for weeks, but there was always something more pressing. The ranch had grown to the point where Samuel had hired 2 more permanent hands, and even then they were stretched thin during busy seasons. That afternoon, while Samuel worked on the coop with William helping by handing him nails one at a time with great ceremony, Jake rode up with news that would change everything. "Railroads coming through," he said without preamble. "Not just a spur line to Miles City, full trunk line right through Cedar Creek." Samuel straightened, hammer still in hand. "When?" "Year, maybe 2. They're already buying up land for the right-of-way." Jake's weathered face was grave. "This changes things, boss. Changes everything." He was right. A railroad through Cedar Creek meant they wouldn't have to drive cattle to Miles City anymore. It meant the town would grow, bringing new businesses, new people, new opportunities, and new problems in equal measure. That evening, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Eliza sat at the kitchen table with maps and ledgers spread before them. "We should buy more land," Eliza said. before the prices go up. We're already stretched with what we have. Then we take on partners. Tom and Jenny have been saving. Jake's been talking about wanting his own piece of land for retirement. We could create something bigger, Samuel. A real legacy. Samuel studied his wife's face in the lamplight. 5 years of ranch life had changed her. Her hands were rougher, her face sun-touched despite the bonnet she wore. But the determination in her eyes was the same as that first day on the platform. "You're thinking of something specific," he said. She pulled out a piece of paper covered with her neat handwriting. "The Hendricks place is for sale. So is the old Barton spread. If we could acquire both, combine them with what we have, that would make us one of the largest operations in the territory." "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. "Is that so bad?" Samuel thought of his father, who'd always dreamed of building something that would last generations. Thought of the graves on the hill, of the children sleeping upstairs, of the future spreading out before them like the prairie itself. "No," he said finally, "it's not bad at all." The negotiations took months. Samuel found himself traveling to Helena to meet with bankers, something that would have been unthinkable even a year ago. Eliza managed the ranch in his absences with an efficiency that impressed even Jake. "She's got a better head for business than most men I know," Jake told Samuel after one trip. "Negotiated a deal with the Army Post for beef supply that'll keep us profitable, even if cattle prices drop." It was during one of these trips to Helena that Samuel received word that would test their still fragile prosperity. Bill Hartley had died suddenly, leaving his ranch in chaos. His son Tommy had returned from law school but had no interest in ranching. He wanted to sell, quickly, to pay off debts his father had hidden. "I could go back east, start practicing law properly," Tommy told Samuel when they met to discuss it. "But I need a fair price, Mr. Granger. Despite everything, I need that." Samuel looked at this young man who'd once tried to steal his cattle, who'd grown into someone trying to make amends for old sins. "I'll see what I can do." The solution came from an unexpected source. The Cattlemen's Association, which had grown to include most of the territory's ranchers, pooled resources to buy the Hartley Ranch collectively. It would be managed jointly, with profits shared according to investment. It was a radical idea, but one that Eliza had been quietly promoting for months. "Cooperation instead of competition," she said the night the deal was finalized. "Imagine what our children could build on that foundation." Our children. Samuel loved how she said it, how natural it had become. William was teaching Catherine to walk, holding her hands as she took wobbling steps across the kitchen floor. When she fell, which was often, she'd pull herself up immediately, jaw set in determination. "She's got your stubbornness," Samuel told Eliza. "And your refusal to give up," Eliza countered. The railroad arrived ahead of schedule, the crews working through the winter of 1878 despite brutal conditions. Samuel hired some of the workers during their off hours to help with construction on the ranch. New barns for the expanded operation, a larger house for Tom and Jenny, who were expecting their first child, and an addition to their own home. 4 bedrooms might not be enough, Eliza said one evening, her hand on her belly in a gesture Samuel recognized. He looked at her in surprise. "Again?" "Again." She smiled at his expression. "Don't look so shocked. We're building a dynasty, remember?" This pregnancy was different from the others. Eliza was sick more, tired constantly. The doctor from town, now a regular visitor with the railroad bringing more medical supplies, prescribed rest. "Rest?" Eliza scoffed. "With 2 children and a ranch to run?" But Samuel insisted, and for once she listened. Margaret came to stay, bringing her stepdaughters, and the house filled with the chaos of children. Samuel would come in from working to find his sister teaching all 4 children to make cookies, flour everywhere, Catherine's serious face covered in dough. "You're making a mess, Papa," Catherine informed him solemnly. "I can see that, little one. Aunt Margaret says messes are how you know you're living." Samuel looked at his sister, who shrugged. "It's true. Clean houses are for people afraid of life." The baby came early, on a night when spring thunder shook the house. Samuel paced the hallway, William and Catherine huddled against him, while inside the bedroom Eliza struggled through the hardest labor yet. "Is Mama going to be all right?" William asked, his 4-year-old face pinched with worry. "Yes," Samuel said firmly, though his own heart was racing. "Mama's strong." When the baby's cry finally came, it was weaker than the others had been. The doctor emerged looking concerned. "A boy," he said, "but he's small, Mr. Granger. Early and small. He'll need careful watching." Samuel entered to find Eliza pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle. The baby was indeed small, but his eyes were open, alert, fighting. "Look at him," Eliza whispered. "He's perfect." "What should we call him?" Eliza looked up at him. "James? For the brother he'll never meet, and for the future he represents." James Samuel Granger seemed determined to prove the doctor wrong. Though small, he was fierce, nursing with a determination that made Eliza laugh despite her exhaustion. Within a month, he'd gained weight, his cries growing stronger daily. "He's got the Granger stubbornness and the Marlowe fight," Margaret observed, watching James grip her finger. "He'll be just fine." The railroad's completion brought immediate changes. Cedar Creek transformed almost overnight from a sleepy cow town to a bustling depot. New businesses opened weekly: a hotel, a restaurant, a proper bank. The school expanded, hiring a second teacher. "Progress," Jake said, but he sounded uncertain. "Not sure if it's good or bad." "It's both," Samuel replied, watching a group of Eastern investors tour the town. "Always is." One of those investors approached Samuel with an offer that would have seemed like fantasy just years before. He wanted to buy beef directly for restaurants in Chicago and New York, paying premium prices for quality stock. "I've heard about your operation, Mr. Granger, the association you've built. I think we could do business." Samuel brought the offer to the association meeting. The room erupted in discussion, some seeing opportunity, others fearing they'd lose control to Eastern money. "We vote," Eliza said, standing at the back of the room where wives were traditionally relegated but increasingly ignored that tradition. "That's what the association is for. We decide together." The vote was close, but they agreed to a trial contract. Within 6 months, Montana beef bearing the association's brand was being served in the finest restaurants back east. The first profit distribution was enough to pay off remaining mortgages for half the members. "We did it," Tom Bradley said, staring at his share of the profits. "We actually did it." "We did something," Samuel corrected. "Now we have to keep doing it." Success brought its own challenges. Other territories started similar associations, creating competition. The increased prosperity attracted less savory elements, gamblers, con men, and worse. Samuel found himself serving on the town council, helping establish laws for a community growing faster than anyone had anticipated. It was William who first noticed the strangers watching their house. He was 5 now, sharp-eyed and protective of his younger sibling. "Papa," he said one evening, tugging on Samuel's sleeve. "There's men by the barn. They've been there all day." Samuel investigated carefully, finding evidence of surveillance, cigarette butts, boot prints in strategic positions. Someone was watching them, learning their routines. "Probably nothing," he told Eliza, but he started wearing his gun again, something he hadn't done regularly in 2 years. The threat materialized a week later. Samuel was in town for a council meeting when Jake rode up, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss, you need to come, now." Samuel's blood went cold. "What happened?" "Men came to the house, 4 of them, Mrs. Granger." Jake's voice was tight with admiration and worry. "She held them off with the shotgun, but they're still there. Want to talk to you about selling." Samuel rode harder than he'd ever ridden, fear and fury battling in his chest. He found 4 men on his porch, Eliza visible through the window with the shotgun trained on them. The children were nowhere to be seen, hidden, he hoped. "Gentlemen," Samuel said, his voice deadly calm, "you have 30 seconds to get off my property." The leader, a soft-looking man in an Eastern suit, smiled unctuously. "Mr. Granger, we represent a syndicate interested in purchasing your operation. Our offer is generous. Not interested." "You haven't heard the number." "Don't need to. This ranch isn't for sale." The man's smile hardened. "Everything's for sale, Mr. Granger. It's just a matter of price, or pressure." The threat was clear. Samuel's hand went to his gun, but Eliza's voice stopped him. "Mr. Whoever you are," she called through the window, I've got both barrels loaded, and I'm a very good shot. My husband asked you to leave. I won't ask as nicely." Tom Bradley and 3 other association members appeared then, having been alerted by Jake. They were armed, faces grim. "Problem here, Sam?" Tom asked. The Eastern man looked at the gathered ranchers, calculating odds. "No problem. We were just leaving. But, Mr. Granger, you should reconsider. The world is changing. Small operations like yours can't compete with progress. Watch us," Samuel said. After they left, he found Eliza in the kitchen, hands shaking as she set down the shotgun. The children emerged from the root cellar where she'd hidden them. "Mama was brave," Catherine said, clinging to Eliza's skirts. "She told the bad men to go away." "Yes," Samuel said, pulling his whole family into his arms. "Mama was very brave." That night, after the children were asleep, Samuel and Eliza stood on the porch, looking out at their land under the stars. "They'll be back," Eliza said. "Maybe not those same men, but others like them. Let them come. We've faced worse." "Have we?" She turned to him. "Samuel, what we've built here, it's worth fighting for, but I won't risk our children." "We won't have to. The association stands together now. We're not alone anymore." He was right. Word of the intimidation attempt spread, and the association responded with solidarity that would have been impossible years before. Guards were posted, patrols organized. The sheriff, now backed by federal marshals thanks to the railroad, made it clear that Eastern syndicates trying strong-arm tactics would face consequences. The would-be buyers retreated, looking for easier targets elsewhere. But the incident had crystallized something for the community. At the next association meeting, they voted to formalize their cooperation, creating a legal entity that would protect member ranches from hostile takeovers. "It's called a cooperative," Eliza explained to the children, using blocks to demonstrate. "Everyone works together, everyone shares the good times and helps during the bad times." "Like a family?" Catherine asked. "Exactly like a family." As 1879 arrived, Samuel stood once again at the graves on the hill, but this time he wasn't alone. William stood beside him, old enough now to understand who lay beneath the cottonwood tree. "That was my brother?" William asked, reading the smaller headstone. "Yes, James. You would have liked him. And that was your first wife?" "Catherine, your sister's namesake." William was quiet for a moment. "Do you miss them?" "Every day," Samuel said honestly. "But missing them doesn't mean I love you and your mother and Catherine and baby James any less. Love isn't pie. Taking a piece for someone doesn't mean there's less for others. Mama says love multiplies. Your mama's right. She usually is." They walked back to the house together, William's small hand in his. The ranch spread out around them, thousands of acres now, hundreds of cattle. A small empire built on determination and cooperation and second chances. Inside, Eliza was teaching Catherine to read while baby James played with wooden blocks on the floor. She looked up as they entered, smiling that smile that still caught Samuel's heart. "There you are. Dinner's almost ready." "What are we having?" William asked. "Beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie for dessert." "Papa, can I say grace tonight?" Catherine asked. "Of course, little one." As they gathered around the table, Samuel looked at each face. Eliza, growing more beautiful with each passing year. William, eager and brave. Catherine, thoughtful and kind. Baby James, fierce and determined. This family that shouldn't exist, born from a deception, a mail-order bride arrangement neither of them had wanted. "Dear Lord," Catherine began in her serious little voice, "thank you for our food and our house and our ranch. Thank you for Mama and Papa and William and James. And thank you for second chances, which Mama says are the best kind of chances." "Amen," they all said together. After dinner, as they often did, the family gathered in the living room. Eliza read from one of her books while Samuel worked on ranch ledgers. The children played quietly, even James seeming to understand this was peaceful time. A knock at the door interrupted the calm. Samuel opened it to find a young woman, travel-worn and nervous, clutching a letter. "Mr. Granger? I'm looking for Mrs. Eliza Granger. I'm her cousin Mary from Boston." Eliza rose quickly, shock and joy on her face. "Mary, is it really you?" The reunion was tearful.
Mary had thought Eliza dead after the boarding house closed, only recently learning through a mutual acquaintance about her marriage and life in Montana. I had to come see for myself, Mary said, to see if it was true that quiet Eliza Marlowe had become a rancher's wife in the Wild West. Not just a rancher's wife, Samuel corrected proudly. My partner in everything. Mary stayed for 2 weeks, marveling at the life Eliza had built. On her last night, she pulled Samuel aside. I was worried when I heard she'd answered a mail-order bride advertisement. Thought she must have been desperate. She was, Samuel said honestly. So was I, in a different way. But you weren't even the one who placed the advertisement. No, my sister did that, but Mary... Samuel looked across the room to where Eliza was tucking the children into bed. Sometimes the best things in life come from the chances we don't choose, the paths we don't plan. Your cousin saved me as much as I saved her, maybe more. Spring came early in 1880, and with it, a letter that would bring everything full circle. Margaret wrote that she was ill again, seriously this time. She needed Eliza to come, if possible. You have to go, Samuel said immediately. She was there for you. We'll manage here. But Eliza shook her head. We'll all go. The children should see their aunt. And Samuel, she's asking for you too. The journey to Billings was an adventure with 3 children, especially baby James, who was just learning to walk and wanted to explore everything. But they made it, finding Margaret thinner but still spirited. There you all are, she said, opening her arms to embrace them. My beautiful, impossible family. Over the next days, as Margaret grew weaker, she and Samuel finally talked about those letters she'd sent, the deception that had brought Eliza west. Are you still angry? Margaret asked. No, Samuel said, holding her hand. How could I be? You gave me back my life, Margaret. You gave me Eliza and our children, and a future I never thought I'd have. I just wanted you to be happy again. I am. Happier than I probably deserve. Margaret smiled. Catherine would be glad. She worried about you, you know. Made me promise to look after you if anything happened. You kept your promise. With help. She glanced at Eliza, who was reading to the children in the corner. She was the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. Margaret died peacefully 3 days later with family around her. They brought her back to the ranch, burying her beneath a young oak tree not far from the cottonwood on the hill. The entire association came to the funeral, along with half of Cedar Creek. She was a force of nature, Bill Hartley's widow said. Wouldn't take no for an answer about anything. That was Margaret, Samuel agreed, his arm around Eliza as she wept. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William asked, Papa, are you sad? Yes, Samuel said, but also grateful. Aunt Margaret brought us all together. Without her meddling, we wouldn't be a family. Then I'm grateful too, William decided, even if I'm sad. That's called bittersweet, Eliza said, pulling him close. It's when something is both happy and sad at the same time. Like when the calves have to leave their mothers to grow up? Exactly like that. As summer progressed, the ranch flourished beyond anything Samuel had imagined. The association's cooperative model was being studied by agricultural colleges back east. They received letters from other territories asking for advice on organization and management. We should write a guide, Eliza suggested one evening. Share what we've learned. We? You know the ranching, I know the organizing. Together we could help a lot of people. So they began writing in the evenings after the children were asleep. Samuel dictating his knowledge of cattle and land management. Eliza shaping it into clear practical advice. The work brought them even closer, if that was possible. Do you ever regret it? Samuel asked one night as they worked. Answering that advertisement? Eliza looked up from her writing. Do you ever regret that I stayed? Never. Then there's your answer. The guide was published in 1881, becoming surprisingly popular among Western ranchers. Orders came from as far as Texas and California. The small income from sales went into a fund for the children's education. They'll have choices, Eliza said firmly. William might want to ranch, but Catherine might want to teach. And James, who knows what James will want? What if none of them want the ranch? Eliza was quiet for a moment.
Then we'll have built it for the building, not the keeping, and that's enough. But as Samuel watched William, now 7, riding beside Jake with natural ease, and Catherine, 5, keeping perfect count of the chickens, and James, 2, already trying to follow his brother everywhere, he suspected the ranch would stay in the family. Not because it had to, but because they would choose it. The seasons turned, each one adding its layer to their story. The house expanded again to accommodate a 4th child, Margaret Eliza, born in 1882 with her grandmother's fierce spirit and her mother's green eyes. The ranch grew too, but more importantly it deepened, roots going down into the Montana soil like the cottonwoods along the creek. One evening in late summer, as Samuel helped Eliza with the dinner dishes while the children played in the yard, she said, "I've been thinking about that day at the train station." "Which part? When I was planning to send you away or when you cried?" "When I stepped off that train with 17 cents and no idea what would happen next." She dried a plate thoughtfully. "I was so scared, Samuel, but also hopeful. Like something inside me knew this was where I belonged, even when everything seemed wrong. And now?" She looked out the window at their children. William teaching James to lasso a fence post, Catherine reading to baby Margaret under the apple tree that had grown from seeds Eliza planted their first year. Now I know that sometimes the best journeys are the ones we never planned to take. Samuel pulled her close, this woman who'd arrived as a stranger and become his whole world. "I love you, Eliza Granger. And I love you, Samuel Granger, even if you did try to send me away." "Best failure of my life," he said, and meant it. As the sun set over the ranch, painting the mountains purple and gold, Samuel thought about the twists of fate that had brought them here. Margaret's deception, Eliza's desperate hope, his own stubborn resistance that had crumbled at the sight of a single tear. All of it had woven together into something stronger than any of them could have imagined. The graves on the hill were still there, still honored, but they were no longer the end of the story. They were part of it, yes, but not the final chapter. That was still being written, day by day, season by season. And the laughter of children, the partnership of Mary, the community of neighbors, and the endless, beautiful work of building a life on the frontier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, always did. Markets would fluctuate, weather would threaten, children would grow and change and leave and return. But tonight, with his family safe under his roof and his wife beside him, Samuel Granger was exactly where he belonged. Not the life he'd planned, but the life he'd been given, and that had made all the difference. The story that had begun with a tear on a train platform had become something larger, a testament to the power of second chances, the courage of starting over, and the truth that sometimes the very thing we think we don't want is exactly what we need. And in the growing dusk of a Montana evening, with the first stars appearing overhead and the sound of children's laughter floating on the wind, it was more than enough. It was everything.